Very much like theirs, and all this might just be an elaborate simulation running inside a little device sitting on someone's table. Well,
Patreon sponsor review time again, and to go with our ongoing love fest for super robots around here, considering last year with the Super Robot Wars reviews, Patreon Chris Wolford decided to ask me to review what is actually one of my favorite mecha series of all time, The Big O. But unfortunately, there are a number of relatively recent developments that have happened which have to be discussed before I can actually address the show itself, most of which revolves around its writer, Chiaki Konaka. And there are no easy ways to breach this topic. If you guys want to just skip the drama, here's the time code to skip to. Now, Konaka used to be a very respected writer in the mid-90s and 2000s, working on a number of well-received series. Most of his works included some reference, homage, or allusion to works of cosmic horror, which tinged the worlds he's worked on with a small flavor of nihilism, where humanity is just a small speck in a much larger, much more terrifying cosmos that we don't always understand. This consistently led to his stories being engaging, as there was always this tinge of mystery, of something so much grander than what our minds might fathom, and the anticipation the heroes could stumble across it or how those forces informed the active events of the story keep many fans on the edge of our seats. Digimon Tamers, Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040, Ultraman Tiga, Serial Experiments Lane, and today's topic, The Big O, being big names among his repertoire that people became obsessed with. However, past the mid-2000s, Konaka basically fell off the map, and studios stopped hiring him in the 2010s entirely. And now, thanks to his own misconduct, we have a bigger idea as to why. For Odaiba Day 2021, the annual celebration of the Digimon franchise, Chiaki Konaka wrote an audio drama sequel to Digimon Tamers, which was performed live by the Tamers voice cast. And the entire audio drama is just a blatant regurgitation of alt-right propaganda and promotes hyper-extremist conspiracy theories. While initially presented in the terms of a counterattack against political correctness and Konaka's perception of cancel culture, the language utilized by this entire script is steeped in terms used by political extremists and neo-Nazis. The plot of this thing has the character Mitsuo Yamaki act as a mouthpiece for Konaka's own political views, and tells the Tamers characters and the audience that the internet itself has become a sentient evil because of the malicious actions of those upon it. But it's not the malice of racists, xenophobes, and nationalists spouting outright lies about people, races, cultures, and identities different to their own that makes people suffer for their own benefits. Oh no! It's all because of victims of cruelty and abuses by those in power are now speaking out against the crimes they've suffered. In particular, members of Japan's cultural minorities that were given a voice by access to the internet instead of suffering in silence. Those are apparently the people that are actually responsible for making the internet evil, according to Konaka. Again, it is not actual cruelty and malice that causes the internet in this thing to go evil, but those speaking about being victims of cruelty and malice that were given by the internet and social media a voice to expose those abusers so their malice would be stopped. That is apparently what made a spontaneously generated AI go kill all humans, not from human malice, but from calls to stop human malice. This, well, let's call it what it is, propaganda, subsequently spiraled into a Konaka board rant about how fact-checkers that dismantle lies concerning conspiracy theories by providing evidence that they don't exist and of the truth of their matters are doing damage to everything, as conspiracy theories, apparently to him, contain more truth than the actual factual truth. And to preserve this fake truth, you have to fight cancel culture. Though the use of the phrase cancel culture, and I hate even using that statement, in this manner is rather telling how much Konaka bought into extremists' conspiracy theories against people crap, considering cancel culture is not actually a thing, or at least in the way it is pretended to be. It's just a label used by those defending something terrible which had that exposed to the masses, and are trying to throw off any responsibility, or acknowledge the consequences of their actions when they are then held accountable for them, to shift all blame to a nebulous, nondescript other for exposing their misconduct instead of acknowledging they did anything wrong. Time and again, we've seen this exact thing where those guilty of what they're accused of try to dismiss the allegations with that label, when if they're legitimately innocent, that's not how they act. But I'm serious in saying that seems to be what Konaka legitimately believes. It is a long-known, and I mean decades-long-known, fact that Konaka has a fascination with conspiracy theories. The man himself has long admitted to such. But beginning with the 2020 COVID-19 pandemic, well, being locked up in his home seemed to drive the guy outwardly nuts. And like many spreaders of malice, he started shouting the quiet part of neo-Nazi beliefs as loud as he could, instead of, as is now apparent, subtly slipping such motifs into his work under the radar as he had been doing before. And this isn't people reading too deeply. A concerned fan mined Konaka's public blog posts and found them just plain full of extremist conspiracies, cult-like diatribes, and just entire paragraphs that read exactly like the introductory primer on how people become inundated to this nonsense. And this was in tandem with his open admittance that he spends more time listening to those that spout conspiracy theories as real news than actual responsible news organizations. Put in context with how he avoids social media and how social media often presents conflicting accounts to his personal views, and it's a bright blinking red flag for the extremists in this. I really don't want to do a breakdown and spotlight each and every single one of these things, as really, you all aren't here for that. But it's apparently the reason he stopped getting work over a decade ago, outside of solely from Toei, who has a history of encouraging neo-Nazi rhetorics in content they've made. And you can't tell me they don't. Not after they made several events where historically anti-fascist heroic individuals were made to ally with and enable the actions of villain factions that canonically originated from Nazis, or pushed fascist ideology themselves. An entire series where the protagonists of them caused calamities by believing in solely their own confirmation bias, while refusing to ever acknowledge their actions might be in the wrong, or causing the calamities they claim they want to stop, which in and of itself is fascist activity. As here's the thing that's not often grasped about conspiracy theories and those who blindly buy into them. It's not just about them making shit up. It's about people with misinformed views having their own biases towards something confirmed in a malicious way, and that confirmation bias working against the person to leave them open to manipulation by parties who are out for their own agendas, as then things that sound more and more insane become perceived as perfectly reasonable to people who value being in the right more than anything. Thus, they don't see how twisted they become, it being how even smart people can fall prey to them as they refuse to believe they might be wrong. And truly malicious people take advantage of that, blending together more and more ridiculous statements until those people who believe in this see the factual truth as looking less real. Which for conspiracy theorists makes them ask, who could possibly be perpetuating this false narrative? And then blaming the wrong people as opposed to the liars who sold them the lie to begin with. 9/11 truthers are a great example of this idiocy in action, as those morons don't understand how buildings can become structurally compromised. And part of why the World Trade Center towers fell has less to do with the steel used in the building, which they keep going on about, but the weight imbalance the structure was under, which led to their collapse. An example I bring up, because by his own admission, Konaka's gateway to the greater depths of this extremism we've now seen of him began with him buying into the 9/11 truther nonsense. Like, I hate to use The Matrix as an example of how reality looks to those with this mindset, as the Wachowskis despise people who view The Matrix as promoting that shit, and when we're trying to say, hey, think about and pay attention to what is going on around you so you aren't manipulated. But that is what conspiracy theories are actually all about. Manipulating those who listen to that bullshit for their own gain, and making you believe you're taking the red pill to see the truth, all the while you're just getting a recolored blue pill that they will sell you endlessly. For as has long been said about propaganda stretching back once more to the Nazis, accuse the other side of that which you are guilty. For there is a sucker born every minute. And that is not helped by how many conspiracies are steeped in outright intolerant, xenophobic persecution of an imagined other that the originators want people to persecute regardless of guilt, instead of finding the actual root causes for the problems, as it's only reinforcing the confirmation bias that matters to these people. There is no secret cabal of racial, religious, or cultural minorities controlling the world, people. There is no deep state as has been sold. Just rich, wealthy assholes using their hoarded power on global marks out in the open to prop up yes men for their own selfish agendas, telling them to attack someone not like them who's already vulnerable and has no power or means of influence on their own, as such has already been taken from them. And that is wrong. I honestly could continue on with this garbage, but the bottom line of it all is these revelations about Konaka and the lies he believes have worked to recontextualize literally everything the man has ever worked on. And I do mean every single one. With regards to the COVID-19 pandemic, while he is still sane enough to admit the virus is real, he also was an anti-vaccination advocate, as he believes that vaccinations contain live viruses, and spouts about how government vaccines deliberately infect people with live viruses to kill them, when that is not at all how vaccines work. Vaccines used to contain a diluted solution of dead virus cells that are incapable of replicating, which the body's immune system uses to learn how to fight the living version of the virus, so it can stop it before the live one can replicate and cause severe illness. I say used to, as modern vaccines don't even use dead virus cells anymore, but the protein markers that indicate that viruses exist. Those markers trigger your body's immune system to make receptors that can detect that protein marker in a given virus when it shows up, so antibodies can attack it before it can multiply. By having prepared that stuff in advance, it allows our bodies to better fight off as it infects it faster. When I got sick with COVID earlier in 2022, the sickness I had was my body's immune response going into overdrive to kill the COVID virus before it could do my body extensive harm, especially as I am in a high-risk category due to lung damage I suffered from pneumonia. But this is relevant to the recontextualization of Konaka's work because in the 1990s he wrote an adaptation of Go Nagai's Devilman Lady, and inserted into his version a plotline about how the government was deliberately infecting people with viruses delivered through vaccinations that mutated the victims into monsters to cause mass death. Again, this wasn't in Go Nagai's original version of the series. That was what Konaka wrote 20 years ago that is solely based on his personal beliefs. And he believes those things because he trusts conspiracies more than actual evidence that shows why he's wrong. He has said this himself, which appears to be tied to why he stopped getting work. He keeps doubling down on what anyone with a brain can prove is a lie. In response to the backlash of the Tamer's live performance, Konaka released in English a public statement about it, and it is a textbook example of a non-apology. A "we're sorry you feel that way" apology, where he takes no responsibility for promoting extremist views and propaganda. He refuses to acknowledge that his statements and beliefs are inflammatory and based on lies, and refuses to acknowledge the actual truths of them, nor the actual malicious harm spouting that rhetoric has caused not just recently, but dating back decades where language used just like his has been a rallying call for those who wish to maim and murder people that haven't done anything to them or anyone, but just because they can, and because they wish to attack our difference. I literally have no words for the amount of contempt I feel for this, and how it has irreparably colored my reading of all the series I like that he had a hand in or was responsible for, as now this apathetic malice permeates all of them. Having said that, however, you're probably wondering why I still agree to review this show. Well, here's the thing. Konaka owns absolutely nothing about any of the series he worked on. The Big O, owned by Sunrise. Ultraman Tiga, Subaraya. Digimon, Toei. Writing on anime, whether it's original or an adaptation, is a work-for-hire gig in Japan. The companies that contracted the writers and directors own all the assets they produce, not the writers or directors themselves, outside of rare exceptions like, say, the Macross franchise, or when the properties originated from light novels and manga, where the creators outright own their IPs. and it's now been tracked back that the reason everyone but Toei stopped giving him the time of day is he became too caustic an individual to be able to work with them anymore. And it's possible his own confirmation bias is preventing him from realizing he might be the problem. Japan's media industry is normally very strict about the conduct of its creative and actor talent that people's careers have literally been destroyed for as little as public intoxication and drug possession, and as extreme as attempting to sleep with a series boss to get a better gig on it. Yes, seriously. For every Western media talent that complains about cancel culture causing them to lose work after they say something racist or commit sexual harassment, aka suffer the consequences of their own personal conduct, there's a Japanese talent who had their career destroyed by just smoking weed but did nothing to harm anyone. So a creator expressing views that literally calls for the subjugation, erasure, and murder of minorities in Japan, and denial of them for even having rights as humans, and blames them for crimes, atrocities, and situations they had no involvement nor responsibility in. And it's frustrating that the fact that actions and malignant beliefs have consequences, it is a lesson we suddenly have to learn again, and that is all the more frustrating. Representative of this being that before this mess, that there were plans for a Digimon Tamer sequel at Toei in the 2010s that never ended up getting off the ground. Whether that was because of Konaka being impossible to work with, or a consequence of the utter mess that was the Tri-movies Last Evolution, Kizuna, or Apple Monsters, well, at this point that's all just plain uncertain. But regardless, that strictness in Japan's media industry, well, that's what makes the attack on cancel culture in that stage play all the more telling. As there wasn't some huge call to cancel Konaka because of this, as he already was punished for his own conduct years ago by him no longer being contracted for work. We just finally got context to why that is. Still, this is why I view it as okay to talk about the Big O as I am here. Konaka and his toxic personal views will not in any way financially benefit from it as far as I am aware, and I am not advocating for his malignant beliefs in doing so. I understand if anyone personally disagrees with this, I do, and I'm not going to support any production he might have in the future. While I might discuss Serial Experiments Lane in the future, don't count on it because of this, past this Konaka is joining the creators and properties on my review blacklist. The list of things I will not review under any circumstances, not even for Patreon requests. But talking about Big O highlights that this modern revelation about Konaka's mindset isn't actually anything new from the man. It's always been there and why he stopped being hired. A lot of people just didn't see it until he started shouting the quiet part out loud. Because, for all that we once cited Konaka as being this big galaxy brain writer, well, it's because a lot of us just were not looking at his works from the proper angle of attack, which has now been laid bare. But this series is one of those I seem to grasp more than others, as the Big O can be described best by a single William Shakespeare quote. All the world is a stage, and the men and women in it, merely players. How many people did I just blow the minds of with that statement? There are a lot of people to this day that don't get this. The Big O is the story of Roger Smith, a negotiator in the city of Paradigm, doing jobs for those who need a middleman to investigate incidents and make arrangements between disparate parties. A necessary job, because in Paradigm, everyone lost their memories 40 years ago, with little explanation as to how or why. Only left with the remnants of what seems to be a fallen civilization isolated from everything and everyone else that might be out there. What caused their memory loss is a mystery throughout the series only few have an answer to, as on occasion remnants of those lost memories make themselves known through unusual technologies and monsters that threaten the populace. And to stop them, Roger joins with his partner, the Megadeuce Big O, to thwart them as their ultimate judge, jury, and executioner.
Big O, and action!
The series opens with one of his routine negotiations going awry, causing him to cross paths with the android R. Dorothy Wainwright, who he comes to employ as his assistant, and whom has a special connection to the technologies that enable the Megadeuce to function, which is hidden within the depths of the city themselves. All of the ages-old city built upon a much more futuristic base no one wants to adventure into or beyond. The primary antagonist of the series comes in the form of Alex Rosewater, the new head of the mega corporation Paradigm, in his own pursuits to control everything within and beyond the city's borders, and master the Megadeus technology himself to become a god among men, as the Megadeuses themselves are sentient and choose their own wielders. Roger an abnormality among the Chosen, as he pilots one of the big titled Mecha, who even among the Megadeus are in a class of their own, as the incarnations of sky, land, and sea, respectively. Alex's search for a means of dominating the power of Megadeus, while not a focused plotline until much later, is resultantly what drives much of the behind-the-scenes events that leads Roger and Dorothy to encounter the secrets of the city, and what literally lurks beneath it, alongside Roger's own negotiation assignments that has them encounter other resurgences in memory, that have resulted in the realization of all sorts of twisted experiments and incidents that have affected the populace, including but not limited to a piano-playing android originally being intended as a weapon of sonic destruction when interfaced with a home-built Megadeus, attempts to resurrect the dead via animal cloning leading to horrific mutant hybrids, a fast-growing plant becoming a giant Christmas tree in the series' holiday episode, and a group of researchers literally creating Leviathan from H.P. Lovecraft's stories that drains the power and life from those near it. These are all examples of how the city ends up having pockets of unrest due to people's memories of the time before the mass amnesia returning without context, and them chasing that memory leading to obsession, manipulation, and often self-destruction and harming those who are just trying to live their lives. And that without context part is important, for as the old saying goes, those who do not learn from the past are doomed to repeat it. But of course, how are you supposed to learn from the past to not repeat those mistakes if you do not have full context to what happened? And that's the problem. You can't. Though once you add in Konaka's later ramblings, the big O is put in context of a rebuke against those who believe the Great Reset can fix the world. The Great Reset being a long-existing socio-political conspiracy theory that states a secret cabal of individuals, the Deep State, the Illuminati, Sele from Evangelion, Jewish individuals, the actual ones who do this have shifted with time, want a redo on everything. That all the world's problems can be solved if we just reset society to an earlier time and just start over from scratch. Destroy everything that was there and rebuild from zero. It's basically the old, things will be better after the apocalypse, or things were better in the good old days, let's just go back to that train of thought. With the conspiracy connected to this train of thought, stating that minorities want everything to come crashing down so they can get ahead after all the majorities and traditionalists are dead. When in actuality, it's usually people that don't like change who are parts of those conservative extremist groups that insist on turning back the clock to when everything was awful, except for those who could more freely bubble themselves in isolation for the consequences of their actions in the real world. Whereas everyone else just wants to get on with their lives, or make things better for either everyone, or those who have suffered under unfair discrimination for being no one else but who they are, and are undeserving of the scorn they've been given, as they've neither harmed nor negatively impacted anyone else. This conspiracy theory has been the root inspiration to a lot of stories, with it being the end goal of a number of nihilistic or culturally regressive bad guys. Few series ever showing a consequence to what that might actually look like if some doomsday cult actually did it. Unfortunately, the Great Reset term was co-opted by the chief executive officer of the World Economic Forum, Klaus Schwab, in 2020 to describe a means by which to resolve the economic consequences and supply shortages caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, and that a lot of the financial problems affecting the world could be resolved if everyone just committed to zeroing out their debts, while companies and nations shifted priorities to self-sustaining market initiatives, paying their employees properly, and environmentally friendly means of production instead of unsustainable endless growth inflation, all for the enrichment of the wealthy, toxic capitalism. He was pretty much ignored into the situation we have right now. The thing is, though, Schwab, in presenting his plan, did not know that far-right groups and conspiracy believers had already long used this Great Reset phrase to describe the aforementioned doomsday theory. Thus, what was a reasonable economic plan for fixing many of the things broken with the modern world and should have been corrected a long time ago, but was prevented from happening because of conservative factions that sought to profit from the imbalance, was thus rolled into the big lie spread by extremists that falsely claimed world leaders planned and deliberately spread the COVID pandemic in order to take over the world economy, which again was a lie, and a lie that was taken advantage of by conservative groups to bloat their wallets. It gaslit every conspiracy theorist to being against pandemic recovery initiatives by and large, and is among the things Konaka ranted about in that blog. This is not helped by what Alex himself considers the deep, secretive power threatening his reign either. A group of minorities who self-describe themselves as having foreign origin that have infiltrated the city, and his gathering of power is to stop these foreign powers from stealing the memories that belong to the people of Paradigm, which thus, by proxy, is owned by him. Thus, he in turn is gaslighting the people of the city to attack a nondescript other as responsible for these terrorist attacks, as opposed to them being incited by his own ambitions. And this ultimately is also revealed to be defined as an invented antagonist, because all these foreign people also originated from Paradigm, and invented their backstory as a means of gathering personal power to oppose the larger corporation, and thus oppose that corporation by orchestrating attacks on ordinary people via the megadeuces they would find to draw attention away from their agents that are searching for the sources of the memories to claim for themselves. The primary agents we see being a woman named Angel, who works undercover for Alex, that also acts as the Fujiko Mine-esque femme fatale, which is Roger's personal foil, with regards to the memory investigation. And another introduced in Season 2 named Alan Gabriel that's a cyborg that I don't really to this day know what the hell he is on about. But Alan also seemed to be playing double agent for both sides in this, while being openly sociopathic. But once again, I'm not changing the context of anything in the series by saying this. That's actually what the series does and is happening within it. The actual revelation of who these foreigners are being just clones known as tomatoes that Alex's father, Gordon Rosewater, created in an attempt to uncover the memories of the past by implanting them into copies of the original bearers. And it's heavily implied their leader, Vera Ronstadt, is in fact Gordon's biological daughter, with Alex being a clone of their father that appeared to inherit everything she should have, and that being the root of why she set things in motion that in turn enabled Alex's own megalomaniacal plans. Meaning much of the series' conflict can reasonably be codified as a family spat that has spiraled out of control to encompass the machinations of the entire city as a result, and thus playing with forces far outside their control as proxies in their fight that will bring down their entire reality on their heads. Granted, most of that is resultant of content and context that comes from the second season of the series, when this series was not originally meant to have a second season. Let me explain. The Big O did not originally make much in the way of waves when it was broadcast in Japan, just part of a number of differing properties Sunrise was experimenting with in the 90s to expand its personal IP library beyond what it was. The 90s were heralded by a huge expansion of the company's capabilities, thanks to Bandai buying up the company to help them meet their financial needs, which had skyrocketed thanks to the demands of various sponsors for series made by them. I have discussed Bandai's buyout of Sunrise before briefly, but despite Gundam creator Yoshiyuki Tomino being an ass about the matter, it actually was to the company's benefit as their more direct means of sponsorship allowed them a chance to produce more series, which were in demand from them and would not have happened without the buyout. Tomino's objection to it was tied solely to the man's hatred of merchandising and sponsorship, and his view that Bandai was their worst sponsor because they don't engage with creative people. Which, as I have often pointed out, is Tomino talking out of his ass. Bandai's hands-off policies with regards to the creation of series is done so they don't screw up the creative staff of a show and ruin something with improper mandates or hand-holding. They are involved in the development stages of a series, can give notes and ideas to creators who don't have to do anything with them, but can improve the process if they at least consider them. And Sunrise much preferred working with them over Takara, who would give Sunrise long, bullet-pointed lists of what their creative staff could and could not do, which was a headache for them to appease, as Takara strangled good content in their sleep with that shit. Whereas Bandai? Yeah, a lot of creators besides Tomino have discussed at length how much they appreciated the utter freedom they were given by which they are allowed to craft their stories, as long as there is something merchandisable to help pay the expense of making their series in the first place, which most are more than happy to work into their plans, as Bandai many times has showcased an understanding of the creative process which requires the freedom to create. Thus, a show or movie being screwed up is rarely caused by Bandai themselves, and the blame lies with the production staff or some bullshit executive unless some form of pattern of misconduct is seen reported on. While there are many things Bandai is responsible for in screwing over a series, cases like Tomino claimed are largely the exception, not the rule. And them doing that is a showcasing of trust towards creators that allowing them the freedom to do what they want will mean they will do the best job they plausibly can. That's not the indifference Tomino accuses them of, just so they can sell toys. It's the expectation that the writers and directors on a project know what they are doing, so that they don't have to intervene and tell them no. They trust them to be reasonable, professional adults. And Tomino regularly has shown himself to be anything but. Like, we fans of entertainment media really do need to have a conversation about how people keep villainizing the mere existence of merchandising, as opposed to the problems that can result from when someone destroys creative pursuits, reputation of content, and its legacy just to sell merch. These two things are not the same, and it's far past the time we stop listening to those who say they are the same and treating that word as gospel. Something needs to pay the production costs of this stuff. That is the reality of the matter. So can we just focus on condemning the producers who make really shitty creative decisions just for the sole reason of selling toys, and producers that insist on over-merchandising a property more than it needs to be? 'Cause I've got a laundry list of toy producers who are guilty of that shit. As with Sunrise, this is in turn where we got a number of great series in the 90s that have had long-term impacts and become lasting favorites. Vision of Escaflowne, Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, Crest of the Stars, Better Man, and others. 3 of the most influential anime of all time came about because of this, which once again asserts my baffledness about Tomino continuing to be a dick about all this decades later, as it's pretty clear whatever beef he has with Bandai, other creators have not had the same problems as him, so it's more than likely that he's the one with the problem. But as I was saying, the Big O resulted from this ability by Sunrise to support smaller productions as well, thanks to Bandai's buyout, creating a system of tiers and tentpole series. The larger, more profitable productions, such as Mobile Suit Gundam, being the tentpoles that supplied the company the capital to finance tier productions. Smaller series which could be invested in at a reasonable loss at worst if they didn't end up drawing the attention they wanted, which thus allowed them to greenlight a series that was to be co-written by Chiaki Konaka, who had gotten a lot of attention on him thanks to Ultraman Tiga, and then up-and-coming Keiichi Hasegawa as his assistant writer, whose notable credits over the past 30 years are long-reaching, with them additionally supported by Shin Yoshida, who the Yu-Gi-Oh! Fandom unjustly hates as they misblame him for a lot of things others screwed up with that franchise's anime. But that financing conduct for new tier IPs only stretches so far, without them evolving to be tentpoles themselves, or otherwise proving their value as an investment for more. So, absent of the eventual second season, how was the show supposed to end? The original ending, RD, was in and of itself a mystery focused around 2 things. Roger's personal origin alongside the fragments of memory he bears despite being much younger than 40, and a string of killings seemingly connected to Dorothy. However, while Dorothy is proven to be a red herring and the actual murderer being a previous faulty production model of the same line Dorothy originates from, the investigation causes Roger to come across a half-finished book named Metropolis. Metropolis, if you're only familiar with that being the name of the city Superman protects in DC Comics, actually has a lot longer of a history to it than that. But once more, the connection is undeniable with regards to the intended implications. Metropolis originates from the 1925 novel and 1927 film of the same name, written by Thea von Harbou and director Fritz Lang. about a city ruled over by the wealthy who trod on the weak and impoverished, who are essential to running an entire labyrinth of interconnected machinery and pipes that are the reason why the city functions and those atop it can live in luxury. The film's protagonist, Freder, son of the ruler of the city, learns of the horrid conditions of the workers underneath, and seeing the uncaring sociopathy of his father with regards to the lies literally being fed to the machines, rebels against the society, and ultimately becomes the mediator between the two sides after a machinist inventor scored by Freder's father tries to use a robot with the appearance of a woman known to both groups to bring down the entire city and kill everyone in it. As you can tell from what I already discussed regarding the animosity between Alex and Vera, and the divide between those above and below, you can see the initially intended allegory between Metropolis and the Big O's full series-long arc from that synopsis. Alex and his father, Gordon, take the role of Metropolis' ruler. Vera, the scorned inventor, sending machines to topple the great structure from beneath it due to how those at the top of the city abuse their workers, and Roger, the mediator between the upper crust and those who walk the streets for a living. Thus, the first season is depicting the series as allegorical to Metropolis through the lens of the detective noir storytelling style of Raymond Chandler or Dashiell Hammett, but with giant robots. Held with the neo-noir atmosphere the series invokes since Sunrise Studio 6, who animated Big O, also did Batman the Animated Series. If you ever hear an anime reviewer talk about the Big O ripping off Batman TAS's aesthetic, that's the actual reason to why. They literally had the same animation team. However, here is the key to how the show was originally meant to end. When Roger goes to the book's author, Gordon Rosewater himself, to ask why the book was never actually finished.
Everything contained in it is a lie. The world destroyed by a cataclysm. Giant robots running amok over the earth. The power of the Creator, wielded by the hand of man.
Yes, but the book has never been finished. Half of its pages still remain blank.
Son, you have to harvest when the time is right. What a shame to watch your tomatoes ripen all season, just to let them rot. You ought to find the answer to your question for yourself.
Yeah, that entire conversation is everything you needed to know. Not every story has or was meant to have a satisfying, conclusive ending. Sometimes the series just puts in place things to play with the setting, and see how things will pan out. Hell, of the 13 episodes, there were only really 5 that had anything resembling an ongoing story. And of them, only 2 can be described as being part of any longer myth arc. This entire discussion here was supposed to be the author talking to the audience, not solely about the incomplete manuscript to Metropolis, but also referring to the Big O as a series itself. We created this story to play with the setting, we set some background details to tell you what was actually going on, and the entire story is actually a work of fiction inside the series itself, which does not have a complete, definitive ending, because life itself does not have a definitive ending. As long as someone lives and they make it so their descendants can live past them, then life will go on. Again, galaxy brain if you're paying attention. It's also part of my problem with so many after the end stories out there, as if the last days of the human race are just the survivors waiting out their final minutes, as opposed to working in any way to rebuild. And Big O Season 1 does show this long before the series ends that this was the actual plan. Anything else between Alex and Vera was just a huge red herring eventually swinging back to that reality. And as early as the show's 4th episode, we are presented with this fact, as Roger on an unrelated case is led down into the depths of the city, deep underground. Only the farther he travels down, the newer and newer the construction is, as if it's all built atop an even greater city, or possibly as is presented when he finds the scale model of a cityscape, the city is nothing but a gigantic set itself. But a set for what, perhaps? Oh, maybe a play, or a film, or a TV show? Again, I got this from the start when the show aired on Toonami in the early 2000s, and everybody told me I was crazy. The episode this is from, Underground Terror, is the central evidence to that being the reality we are being showcased, as Roger investigates the mad ravings of writer-turned-conspiracy nutjob Michael Seebach, who took on the identity Schwarzwald after the man was driven insane by the realization of the true nature of their reality, and afterwards seeks to expose the truths through his mad ramblings. Through his short-lived appearances, he acts as the Joker to Roger's Batman, treating everything as a joke as he goes on wild tirades that seriously just don't make sense unless you're keyed into the same fact he is. The very city they've built and live in is in and of itself a lie. And that is something exposed both in the first episode of the second season and brought into very direct focus as the series actually ends, which I will get to in a moment. But yeah, from the talk with Gordon Rosewater, it's very clear the story was about stories, and the myth arc of the series was disguising that the stories about stories was all staged on a gigantic set for the entertainment of the audience watching, which was meant to be interpreted as either us, the viewers from beyond the fourth wall, some greater cosmic power that has orchestrated this entire simulation Matrix style, or even the Megaduce robots themselves being the power behind everything, as the giants playing with their human toys. And that was before the second season made the all the world's a stage reading quite literal.
Paradigm City, a grand ostentatious stage. This is a comedy, that which I was searching for, the true memories, they were...
Though again with recontextualization of Konaka's later conduct, all of the Megaduce robots being based off of creatures from Jewish mythology, and a lot of Konaka's statements being openly anti-Semitic. Yeah, that's a rather big yikes. But if that was what the series was doing, if it was that transparent about it, and the story meant to be unfinished as the final curtain called, then why the second season? Well, we can thank international audiences, and to a greater extent, Toonami, for that. For those who only know of Toonami in its late-night Sunday evenings block that runs out of Adult Swim and Cartoon Network these days, Toonami originally started out as a weekday afternoon block in 1997, first started to show off various action cartoons that Cartoon Network had the rights to, but it eventually transitioned to showing off older imported anime such as the original Go Lion Voltron series and Robotech. As the anime interest boomed in the mid to late 90s, however, Bandai expanded its foot into the American market by building up Bandai Entertainment, their own anime import division, and partnered with Cartoon Network and Toonami to feature more and more recent anime as part of the block alongside other non-Sunrise series like Dragon Ball, Sailor Moon, the Tenchi series, and so on. Toonami is centrally responsible for the biggest push of more teen-oriented, mature-in-tone anime, as opposed to, say, Pokemon's respective story tones. And one of the biggest explosions in popularity that resulted from that is the interest in Sunrise's Gundam franchise, with them starting out their broadcast of those series with Gundam Wing. While Toonami was never truly picky about what anime they featured, and the eclectic content was often to the block's benefit, as allowed what was shown to fit and open others up to a wide variety of content, well, Sunrise's series basically became the staples of the block's lifespan, and as it changed time slots and airing periods, the only time that ever actually changed was when regulations about violence in programming at certain times of day was changed during the Bush administration early in his 2000s administration, and made it so more and more of Sunrise's library couldn't be broadcast except on a late-night block. Which didn't quite make sense, as Naruto was what eventually killed the block when all that populated it for a time was just that series, and that series alone, which is what destroyed its ratings as well. Naruto was never as popular as people think it was, with the sole other providers of Sunrise-related anime on television being either on the Sci-Fi Channel or a late-night weekends run, by scheduled air times long out of the easily accessible touch of little kids. But that's getting ahead of myself again. For you see, the Big O, with its mysterious and unexplored world, was seen as prime material for Toonami to finance more of, when they saw the revenue they had been generating from being the premier block for anime in the Americas. For they were really raking in the dough. Thus it was a no-brainer to see what they had and see if they couldn't finance more. The Big O Season 2 thus became the first Toonami original anime, of a few that got made, and broadcast in America before returning to airwaves in Japan. Though ironically once more, due to the content of it, it was once more only able to air as part of the Adult Swim Toonami Midnight Run block past midnight, which actually made it an absolute pain to stay up to watch in the time before DVR recording. The Adult Swim programming block could do this because of the same reason Adult Swim was eventually able to revive Toonami in the wake of the 2012 April Fool's Night revival. The same people behind Toonami at Warner were also responsible for Adult Swim. The two blocks would regularly see anime content exchanges over the years, so if one didn't fit in one block, then it could be seen on the other. And here's where we also need to talk about another aspect of all this, and why it's disingenuous to say the series was originally planned for 13 episodes, because it ironically wasn't. It actually was originally meant to be a 26-episode series, but was cut short because of a lack of audience on the Japanese side of things, only for its popularity in the West to give it a chance at its original full run after the fact, and after the series had already been changed to fit the 13-episode format. This is also what was being referred to with regards to the Rosewater discussion about the story being a half-finished product. RD was a non-ending conclusion that, if nothing more was done, would have wrapped the story by giving enough of a final act feeling of things so no one was left wanting, alongside once more giving an idea of what the larger picture was. And then it kept going 4 years later. And despite the staff of Toonami's best of intentions, and Sunrise's best of intentions to fulfill the original commitment of that 26-episode run, why that gap exists explains a lot about what happens next. The second half of the series opened on the episode Roger the Wanderer, with Roger Smith experiencing a hallucination of the real world outside of the simulated reality the entire show exists within, where the series was a commodity overlooked by the greater populace, a blatant metaphor for the series itself and its Japanese reception, and Roger presented as a has-been actor out of work that is ultimately forced to return to the only role he felt defined his life, by going back into the simulation to fight with Big O once again. The entire episode, even with someone like me who saw the plan in the first half of the show, comes off very oddly. But once more due to more recent events, the entire plot is put in better context. Like with Yamaki in that stage play last year, Chiaki Konaka was using Roger's character as a mouthpiece for his own issues in returning to make a sequel season to something he had already put to bed, and didn't expect nor intend to make anything more of, and the animosity he has at the idea of returning for more. You see this throughout his content library. The stories he makes are not designed to possess sequels to them. With exception to the Tamer sequel plans that fell through, the Tamer's audio drama he did do that is everything I didn't want from a Tamer's continuation, and I mean that in the worst possible terms. And how you might count Ultraman Tiga's movies as sequels, the Big O Season 2 was really the only one. This is why the second season simultaneously feels like it's finally fulfilling the myth arc of the show that the first season had set up, and yet seems distinctly and arbitrarily detached from the first season. And it's not that Sunrise had transitioned into primarily utilizing digital animation versus the traditional hand-drawn style, which the company had transitional issues with like every animation company did back then, but the fact that 4 years had passed between production cycles. That gap time means that the fully intended original plot would have faded from the author's mind, making follow-up more difficult to craft without getting in the same mindset one would have had before. This should more than anything else explain the feeling of the story being off, as since the Big O, Konaka had already gone off to do Digimon Tamers and some other content, which would have shifted his creative focuses and mindset. We see this quite often when writers come back to make sequels of older works all the time. There's just something plain off about the newer entry that leaves it in some way inconsistent to the older work, as they just cannot get back into the previous headspace they were in. Worse, Konaka was the only writer for the entire run of the second season, with no involvement from either Keiichi Hasegawa or Shin Yoshida in development for the stories. It was solely Konaka. And as I've been inferring, solely Konaka seems to be his downfall, as after he gets stuck in his own head, no one's there to drag him out of it to make sure others outside the person writing it have stuff come across appropriately through peer review. It explains why, in retrospect, more of the second season becomes defined by his political beliefs as a central influencer of the filler content before the ultimate grand climax. A lot of the show's successful bits of lighthearted comedy that were often missed in the back half of the show can be attributed to Yoshida and Hasegawa, while humor is not, nor has ever been much of a strength of Konaka's. He can emulate it, certainly, but it's always more sarcastically toned or mocking. So just when a recurring antagonist, Beck, shows up for a fight in a three-piece combining robot that homages Robo. The show makes this whole big elaborate work of animating the thing combining into this great awesome behemoth, meaning it should be more than a match for the big, and yet... And that is legitimate subversive comedy. The entire episode is playing up that kind of joke. Though that is also the hindrance. After doing it so many times, you come to expect the punchline as it plays that punchline up and up and up and up, instead of distracting from its eventual showcase. But to say that the series completely jumps the shark as a result because of him starting to say the quiet part out loud is disingenuous. Many reviewers at the time thought the second season was the show's downfall, and how it contradicted the first, and made the series derivative to The Matrix and The Truman Show when both those films were newer. But in marathon of the series together and paying attention to what was set up in the early half, that just isn't the case. If anything, the element that is missing from the second season is the subtlety of the first season. Its problem is, again, the eventual problem Konaka ran into later down the line. It was shouting the quiet part out loud. Roger the Wanderer, as an episode, screams that everything we're seeing about the Megadeus conflict and paradigm is one gigantic simulated reality, building off of other signs that this was the exact thing happening the entire time. Konaka just started to make it blatant because he got mad that the general audience for the show did not get that. And by the series' end, when contemporary critics savaged the ending as someone trying too hard to rip off that type of story, they still didn't get that's what it was from the start. But it wasn't based from those works, but once again, from the basis of cosmic horror, where some unfathomable power set this all in motion, and we're just entertaining playthings of something so far above us in power that we can't even see the stage lights mounted above the players for what they really are. A position validated inside the series by the various characters literally seeing the stage lights mounted above them and not understanding what they were. A man who's been stuck in a room his entire life having to step outside for the first time won't know what a tree is. And the comparisons to both The Truman Show and The Matrix are disingenuous at best. In both those respective films, they let the audience in on what's going on from the start, that these are the things being done in universe, and the characters have to fight against those enforcing the simulation. It's a completely different scenario with the Big O, in that the simulation is piece by piece breaking down due to the actions and machinations of those within the simulation that eventually leads to the simulation risking complete and total collapse as the deception about their world piece by piece is torn away. And that's not even the focused on plot. That's all the consequence of the focused on plot, with Roger and Dorothy's exploration of the consequences of the simulation guiding focus away from itself. That's the purpose of the mystery about memories and Megadeus beyond it being the stage-telling pieces of the varied stories. They are distractions keeping focus and attention away from trying to find anything beyond the city that just doesn't exist. And that is the horror being unleashed upon these people without true realization of it. They're stuck here. All they have is each other and the provided remnants of civilization being jerked around by the man sitting atop it all that doesn't care one bit about their lives, only in how their assets can be used to further his own goals. And you have no true means of escaping this drudgery for anything beyond it. It's this claustrophobia that the series builds that is the largest strength of this arc. Because discovering this fact of the world is not the story's core focus, it allows itself to build and build and build until it cannot be denied anymore. That is the power the myth arc possesses, but if you don't see it, and don't understand Konaka literally shouting its fact in her ear, sorry, we can't help you. I've talked more than I meant to about the myth arc because, well, it's the single most misunderstood aspect of the story. People to this day not catching it at all, even with awareness of it going in. Even the Wikipedia page taking until years after the show got on Blu-ray to actually have someone explain it for the masses. But the myth arc, in truth, is not as large a part of the show as one might expect, as it's not focused on until late in the series as it is. The Big O spends its time centrally focused on the atmosphere of the setting and its detective noir-like motifs. Roger's internal monologue tracking the progression of events perfectly in beat with the series' fantastic jazz-influenced musical score, with it all told from his perspective and no one else's. The slow moments to build character, followed by the pace increasing as each case is introduced and investigated, building to their climaxes on both large and small scales, and that makes each case engaging as you inevitably become invested in either this character's involvement or those he comes into contact with. Steve Bloom, who voices Roger in the English dub, I say without hyperbole, was born for this role, as it allowed him to give off such a nuanced performance of the character, though by him being cast for the role, it's in turn caused Roger to likewise be compared and contrasted against Steve's breakout role of Spike Spiegel from Cowboy Bebop, with both of them technically being differing sides of extra-legal investigation, but the utilization of his voice for both inevitably brings to focus the commonalities of the two. Assisted again by the character Angel, who acts as a foil to Roger, likewise being voiced by fellow Bebop cast member Wendy Lee, even though the primary contrasting dynamic is presented with Dorothy, voiced in English by Leah Sargent. Sadly, the Japanese roles for the cast just honestly do not compare. Even the production staff for the series finding the English cast just better fit the intentions of the character with how they better fit what was done, at least in most respects. But over time, what really won everyone over from a cast perspective is simply the dynamic between Roger and Dorothy, with Roger the sardonic loner doing his best to settle messes in the world, contrasting against the cold logic of an android that acts as human, despite being unable to truly express herself as human, even though she does have emotions buried deep within her. How the two advance as characters and people in response to the other is the strongest draw in the show, and their banter a highlight of it all, as at the time the series was made, this kind of interaction, it was very rarely done. It's become more commonplace in certain quarters of series, but more from the angle of someone suffering under the affections of tsunderes, as opposed to two people with conflicting views and personas having to work and live at close quarters in the way Big O depicted. Again, helped by the consistency of design and the musical score throughout.
Good morning, Roger.
Dorothy, give me a break.
Though how the music plays such a large part in selling the story also brings up the other controversy about this show. And this is going to come up if anyone goes out to find the show for themselves, as, well, here's the original theme song. Now, does that sound familiar to anyone? Yeah, the original composer for the song, Rui Nagai, was deliberately trying to homage Queen with that theme, as they were keyed into the whole savior of anything thing with Big O and Roger, as the city was all that there was. And this kept happening with the various theme songs. Season 2's theme song, Respect, composed by Sahashi, was done in homage to the theme of Gary Anderson's series UFO. Both songs eventually needed to be replaced. But that replacement theme, Big O, Show Must Go On, which was used when the entire series began to be rebroadcast in Japan in the late 00s, is the one you'll find on the Blu-rays now. And yet, it itself is a ripoff of the song All Day and All of the Night by The Kinks. Why the theme song had to be replaced, despite its use in several key scenes of the show, is because of a number of music plagiarism scandals that had rocked the Japanese media industry in the 2000s. The widespread access to the internet by that point had allowed users around the world to be able to listen to and actively compare soundtracks to varying series or performers which they might be a fan of. Thus, what might have been an obscure song to reference in one culture or nation might be one that is heard every other day in another. It started to raise red flags about copyright infringement to as directly lift from soundtracks as they did, thus resulting in the songs needing replacement. Big O is not the only series to suffer from this, though. As Anime News Network editor and Discotheque team member Mike O'Toole wrote about in an article in 2017, this kind of music resampling was at a time all over the Japanese music industry, and a lot of anime ended up needing to change their soundtracks when they went to home video to avoid getting sued. Or at least that's the belief. Very few actually got to the lawsuit point as far as I'm aware, but for a lot of it, it's better safe than sorry. Unfortunately, while it might seem like it's a small thing, it ends up being a major detraction as it just isn't the same without the original scores. The original Bandai Entertainment DVDs have the original songs, they pass through, but eventually Sunrise just got cold feet, so any newer Blu-ray, it has the replacement tracks. But again, even that doesn't break the series as it's one that acts as more than the sum of its parts. The performance, the tone, the mixing of the elements here between just utilizing the story engines that each enables, of machine gods' machinations encroaching upon the noir story, is just a mashup that works. Hell, even the retroness of the robots helps them fit alongside the setting with little disturbance or interruption. All the Megadeuces we see here were designed by Keiichi Sato and Kazuyoshi Katayama, who based much of their design elements on older super robots. In particular, the super robot Red Baron from the series of the same name, and the manga and tokusatsu series Giant Robo, which the two had adapted in the 1990s into a sadly forgotten anime OVA series that I actually highly recommend. And I recommend it because, goddamn, that OVA's ending twist is freaking amazing. No joke, the twist ending makes this OVA, and I'm not going to spoil it for you. But as a result, these were not meant as speedy powerhouses, but going back to Japanese roots with the greatest powers of giants going to war, in that they may not be the most spry, but can tank everything thrown at them, and their movements are truly unstoppable. The retroness of them doesn't end there, with their movements all bearing the full weight of their power as the city crumbles under their steps. And they are all armed to the teeth despite their bodies, showing that their armor is riveted together like an old iron building. There is not a single piece of the Big O that is not in some way either armed or armored. Its abs contain missiles, the skirt armor grappling hooks, its torso 2 different types of guns, its head 2 types of beam weapons, and its fists 3 types of finishing weapons. And that armor it's donned in, barely anything is shown to phase it, belying that smaller, more agile mecha just wouldn't stand a chance. Hell, there are several times it does face things much faster than it, and yet they don't end up doing anything lasting. The only foes that seem to deal even the slightest of damage being other big-class mecha. The aerial-focused Big Duo, piloted by Schwarzwald and later Alan Gabriel, and Alex Rosewater's Marinoid-specialized Big Fow. Both of these mecha bear many of the same abilities as Big O, only specialized to dominate other environments as masterfully as Big O does. And the few times they are allowed to engage one another, does the collateral damage just plainly add up? For a significant element of why these titans had their conflict so anticipated as well, was a recurring scene of war to end all war, one of the red herrings of memory belying the power of the Megadeuces, in that their existence may have destroyed the precursor world before the current setting, that is both proven true and false simultaneously. But what's more with the myth arc? The anticipation of the mystery, and that this could be the fate of all because of a war of these mechs beginning again, brings what's more the sense of unease and dread that for the years between the seasons, kept people questioning what the finale over their conflict over them could actually be, and what role memory actually played in it all. And boy did they get their answer, when they remembered that Deus is Latin for God. For as the series reaches its eventual climax, the battle between Roger and Alex ultimately results in the Big O linking with Dorothy to unlock its own full capabilities. but in doing so awakens Big Venus, the final Big, as the two's fight broke the limits of the system, thus requiring the entire simulation all be erased and reset. Angel, the character I barely mentioned that had been in search of memories, is revealed to be the physical incarnation of the control system for Venus, and thus the controller of the entire simulation. The awakening of her to this role being the trigger for the reset call, leading to everything that was here being destroyed. But the task Roger was brought here to be, to last through it all, to find an answer through all these tales to respond to Venus, brings the truest point of the series home about the nature of one's reality and oneself, in that it shouldn't matter what your origin is. It does not define who you are. And it's more important for one to meaningfully decide what you do with your life and whether you are able to find satisfaction within it. That sometimes existing in and of itself as part of a world is what gives it value, and what can make a difference, as long as you live your life well. And with an appeal to these godly machines, the series ends on everything resetting, just without a seeming influence of the Megadeuces within it. This ending... I gotta admit, I've grown to hate cosmic reset button endings more and more over time, as it seems like they're most frequently used in order to make an awful protagonist escape the consequences of their actions, and acknowledging they were wrong, and the decisions they made resulting in genocide for everyone. Here, though, it's one of the few times this works, as they're not trying to wipe what they did wrong away. In fact, that's what Roger is trying to avoid. He's trying to save the people and the chances at life the simulation granted those who lived within it, and taking from the abusers the power they worshipped. It is a appealing to God more life situation, not a, nope, I cannot do it all to avoid responsibility for my crimes by pushing the cosmic undo reset button key. Which is the take on the reset button that absolutely infuriates me, yet has become the more common utilization of the reset button. I get the frustration though, as it really just leaves everything at the end of the second half of the series as seemingly unfinished as at the end of the first, unless you were paying attention to the reality of the simulation in the first place and realized that Roger won the argument, and everything was restored to how it should have been because he successfully performed his chosen role. But yeah, that's the big O, and for good or for bad, even with the hindrance Konaka now invokes, there is likely never to be a series remotely like it again. A neo-noir mecha series bathed in style and substance whose myth arc revealed it to be in actuality a simulation isekai story, touching on complex themes and character dynamics and how they place themselves in a world kept from growing as it should, all trying to escape a trap forced upon them. I am honestly unsure how well I've addressed the varied elements of the series in this, as I've deviated from my normal style of review. But due to how the longer myth arc is poorly understood, I felt that's where I need to lay my focus more directly on. The individual episodes, however, are all stronger draws, and work better when brought into them more blind than me breaking them down individually would have managed. And there is still a lot in them for the character stories to draw your own attentions, be it Hasegawa's comedy plots, Konaka's larger cosmic horrors peeking in from beyond the dark, or even Yoshida's simple human stories before everything involved proceeds to escalate towards breaking their world. With regards to the secrets of the story, I honestly hope it's one that might see spotlighted Super Robot Wars again, thanks to other mecha series also attaching themselves in part to VR and isekai content, and I feel could complement them again beyond Big O's appearance in Super Robot Wars Z. Who knows, it might just happen, and we'll then see a proper return for Roger, Dorothy, their allies in the Seated Paradigm, and the guardian mechanical deity of the Earth that asks you plead out to your innocence, with them thus demanding the presence of the stage. The story may be over, but the show forever goes on.
Big O!